I'm the Philosophical Bachelor, and today I want to talk about how all is determined, but we need not be fatalistic about it. In the Critique of Pure Reason, Immanuel Kant identifies four antinomies, the third antinomy being on the question of free will. Antinomies are positions diametrically opposed to each other, which can be equally validly argued for, making reason seem divided against itself, and leaving the question it attempts to answer irresolvable. The first part of this article revisits the supposed antinomy of determinism versus libertarianism as diametrically opposed answers to the question of free will, and reconciles the two positions, not by the established theory of compatibilism, but by demonstrating that libertarianism is reducible to determinism. The second part discusses why determinism does not lead to fatalism and explain how the future remains unknown and unknowable. Libertarian free will seems to be just plain common sense, with our phenomenological experience of choice and decision-making pointing to an inner agency, which we can freely will to, for instance, raise our hand or keep it at our side. Determinism, on the other hand, has at its heart the natural law of every effect being caused by one or more causes. Libertarianism too depends on cause and effect, but with the will being the cause and the hand raising or refraining being the effect. Hence, in terms of theoretical parsimony, determinism is the simpler theory, while libertarianism requires an additional entity of an immanent will. Having postulated such a will as the central causal agent, libertarianism has the burden of proof to find such a will within us. Such a burden can and has been offloaded to the scientists as an empirical quest to seek out the biological nature of the hypothetical will, and when found would have proven the existence of such a will. Whether such a will is then free would depend on the biochemical processes behind its decision-making. Both theories of determinism and libertarianism have been reconciled through their dialectical offspring, compatibilism. Compatibilism assumes a determined universe, but allows for free will. It manages this reconciliation through a sleight of hand, by having the free-willed human being in a determined universe choose freely, without coercion, what the universe has anyhow determined to occur. For the sake of clarity, let us consider three parallel universes. 1. A determined universe. 2. A libertarian universe. And 3. A compatibilist universe. That is, a determined universe but with free-willed people populating it. In all three universes, the same agent comes to a fork in the road. In the determined universe, he chooses path A and continues down it. Why? Because some causes have determined that he will execute the effects of these causes. For instance, at the end of path A is his workplace, and he is going to work. In the libertarian universe, he likewise is on his way to work, but he can, out of his free will, at any point change his mind, decide not to go to work, and hence either go down path B, return the way he came, remain on the spot, or even go down path A but continue past his workplace to a pub. Any number of possibilities are open to him. In the compatibilist universe, which really is the same universe as the determined one, the agent takes path A, but he freely chooses, out of his own free will, to take path A and go to his workplace. An outsider viewing the agent in the determined and compatibilist universe would not detect any difference between the behavior of the agent. Any difference will only be observed of the agent in the libertarian universe. For the outsider, everything that happens in the determined and the compatibilist universe will appear the same, and that is because the occurrences in these two universes are in fact identical in every visible detail. The standard explanation of how freedom can be retained in the compatibilist universe is that while the agent has no alternate possibilities to choose another path different from the path that would have been taken in the determined universe, he faced no obstruction or interference in making his choice and in that way remained free. However, this explanation misses a subtle but once articulated, obvious point. Whichever worldview one holds, be it determinist, libertarian or compatibilist, cause and effect remains an ineluctable process. The key difference between the determinist and the libertarian and compatibilist view is how they view the concept of causation concerning beings capable of free will. A determinist investigating the cause of the agent taking path A may point to physical explanations such as biological or chemical processes in the body, which causes the neurons in the brain to direct the agent in a particular way, in this case to decide, open and close inverted commas, on path A. Such causal explanations are on the biological level. Our determinist may also approach it on a more macro level where he simply attributes the cause as the agent having to go to work at his workplace located along path A. A libertarian and compatibilist will attribute the decision to the agent's free will. No quote marks this time around the word decision, since the decision would be really one taken by the agent and not a pseudo-decision like in the determinist universe. The cause of the decision in the libertarian and compatibilist universe is the agent's free will, which brings me to my point. The libertarian worldview is equivalent to the compatibilist worldview, and they are both reducible to the determinist worldview. That is, all we have is determinism. My argument for this proposition draws on Spinoza's metaphysics. Determinism follows from cause and effect. Cause and effect is a law of nature where every effect is a result of one or more causes. Every object obeys the laws of nature, and hence they obey the relation of cause and effect. Human beings are a part of nature, and hence there is no reason to believe that human beings are an exception to this law of cause and effect. Our decisions are caused by our thoughts, which are caused by other thoughts, emotions, actions, or interactions with external objects. Even if we do not know exactly how we arrived at a particular thought, for instance, when a thought just popped into our heads seemingly from out of nowhere, it must have come from somewhere. We do not know where simply because we do not have an adequate knowledge of the cause of that thought. The same applies for some decisions where we are unable to trace the causal chain. When we say that a thought or decision, for what is a decision but a thought, arose out of our free will, it does not mean that it came from out of nowhere, since if it did, then it is also not out of our free will. We think it came from some source within ourselves, the mechanism of which is not entirely clear to us. This simply means that science has yet to find out what and how exactly it happened, and not that there is some spooky, mysterious process at work which somehow does not obey the laws of nature. In addition, libertarians in fact depend on cause and effect only for everything else other than their purported free will. If everything else did not obey cause and effect, the purpose of free will be thwarted. Its decisions will amount to nothing since it will not be able to reliably know what will happen, as without cause and effect, we will not know how anything will behave. While cause and effect is more obviously seen in physical processes, it does not rely on a materialist conception. Even for immaterial things such as thoughts, cause and effect still holds, since thoughts can be the cause of other thoughts. For the moment, free will may appear to be a black box which generates decisions, but there is no scientific basis to believe that what is happening within this black box is so special that it defies the laws of nature. Even if scientific findings finally show us that free will is a fundamental cause unto itself, that simply makes free will a cause. Since free will is just another cause which produces effects, determinism still applies. In that case, libertarianism and compatibilism will be equivalent to each other and reducible to determinism. Now that we have established that we live in a deterministic universe, does it mean that we have to give up our sense of agency, our sense of free will? Why bother waking up in the morning, or for that matter try to do anything at all, since everything has already been determined and will just play out whichever way it has been determined to play out? Wouldn't trying to do otherwise just be a delusion, since there is no escaping what has been determined? This way of thinking is known as the lazy argument, which plagues the worldview of fatalism. Fatalism posits that since everything is predetermined, in the immortal words of William Shakespeare, all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. Our lines are fixed, and we only act them out in a mechanistic or determined way, unable to deviate from the script, this script being written by the ineluctable chain of cause and effect. Even if the universe is determined, does it mean that it is predetermined or fated? What does predetermination and fatalism entail? What has happened in the past cannot be changed. Since time flows only in the forward direction, what has taken place up to the present moment is over. Precisely because it is over, what has happened becomes unchangeable. Up to the point of time of the present, determinists and libertarians can agree that the events of the past are over and unchangeable. What they will disagree on is what happens next. For the determinists, the effects of past events become causes for what takes place from that moment onwards. These causes and their interactions will then produce their effects. If we had an exact record of what was happening with every single atom and molecule in the universe at any instant of time in the past or present, we could in theory, using the laws of science which are presumably expressed as a system of equations and a very powerful supercomputer, compute what will happen next and in that way, by time-stepping systematically through the equation system, predict the future. Libertarians will disagree. Free will as an independent force and its own cause can make its own decisions in an unpredictable way, making the future unpredictable. We have already discussed why it seems unlikely that our will somehow is so special that cause and effect does not apply to it. So we can set this libertarian counter-argument to predetermination aside. However, I want to consider other counter-arguments which will show that fatalism is not a necessary correlate of determinism. To begin with the obvious, we do not have such an exact record of what is happening with all the atoms and molecules in the universe. Currently, we do not know all the laws of science, though we may be able to in future. In addition, we do not possess such a supercomputer that can make the required calculations, though once again, we might be able to build one powerful enough in the future. Once we do, we can feed the data of the relevant parameters of the atoms and molecules in the universe into the supercomputer program with the laws of science to predict the future. However, even if we manage to do that, quantum uncertainty due to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle may introduce some randomness into the calculations, enough to make the results incorrect. Or maybe not, since quantum uncertainty only operates at the subatomic level. The laws of mechanics operate at much bigger scales, and so quantum uncertainty may be irrelevant, though there are still some processes, such as radioactive decomposition, that remain somewhat random and hence merely probabilistic, causing the calculations to be wrong. A side note, uncertainty or randomness in nature should not be mistaken for free will. Free will is a kind of control quite different from a loss of control from random effects. Besides, there is the problem of how predictions modify behavior. Say we have the science, the record of the atoms and molecules, are able to build a supercomputer, and somehow are even able to overcome the random processes in nature. We now have the predictions. What is stopping us from frustrating the predictions? Recall that determinism is about cause and effect. Having expectations of the future in the form of predictions may cause us to modify our behavior. Does such modifications defy determinism then? Is this proof of free will? Not quite. Expectations of the future in the form of predictions are themselves a cause, which lead to effects. Future events are path-dependent, even if Greek tragedies like Oedipus Rex or ancient Mesopotamian tales like the appointment in Samara suggest otherwise. Determinism does not entail fatalism. Let us examine the appointment in Samara instead of Oedipus Rex simply because of its brevity. The speaker is deaf. There was a merchant in Baghdad who sent his servant to market to buy provisions, and in a little while the servant came back white and trembling and said, "Master, just now when I was in the marketplace, I was jostled by a woman in the crowd, and when I turned, I saw that it was death that jostled me. She looked at me and made a threatening gesture. Now, lend me your horse and I will ride away from this city and avoid my fate. I will go to Samara and there death will not find me." The merchant lent him his horse, and the servant mounted it, and he dug his spurs in its flanks, and as fast as the horse could gallop he went. Then the merchant went down to the marketplace, and he saw me standing in the crowd, and he came to me and said, "Why do you make a threatening gesture to my servant when you saw him this morning?" "That was not a threatening gesture," I said. "It was only a start of surprise. I was astonished to see him in Baghdad, for I had an appointment with him tonight in Samara." The tale is one of fatalism. The servant's death was fated to take place in Samara, and his act of avoiding death led him to precisely where he was fated to die. While a fascinating story, we should not confuse it with the predictions of our future supercomputer. Programmed properly, the supercomputer will be able to spell out each moment in great detail, and do so for as many moments as an agent may desire, covering, say, the length of the agent's life. There will be no false moves, such as the servant thinking he is running away, but in effect running towards catastrophe, since the servant would have been able to read the full details of what is to happen and will be able to react accordingly. Once he has the predictions, he can react differently than predicted, which will then modify the chain of cause and effect. While fatalistic narrative necessity may be a useful plot device for creative writing, there is no reason, based on determinism, to believe that the outcome will anyhow remain the same, since the causes have changed, which will then lead to different effects. While this is out of line with fatalism, it is in line with determinism, which demonstrates that fatalism does not follow from determinism. A sharp reader may at this point have thought of a way of helping fate along its way. The supercomputer can merrily make its calculation and output its prediction, but these predictions will be kept secret, especially from those people who are destined for tragedy. As a matter of fact, the predictions have to be kept secret from everyone, since anyone with access may then try to thwart fate by acting in ways to frustrate the predictions. So no one can know the predictions, which bring me to my next point. Even if we manage to achieve the scientific and technological prowess required to predict the future, it will be useless, since once the predictions are known by anyone, they are bound to fail. Either that or no one can know the predictions, which then defeats the purpose of even trying to make the predictions, other than to retroactively realize what we already know simply from observing the world. The proper test for fatalism requires an agent to have knowledge of correct future predictions of his fate, after which he tries to defy it, but fails to do so. Since the future cannot even in principle be correctly predicted in a useful way, fatalism fails to pass the Popperian test of falsifiability. It cannot be proven to be wrong, which makes it worthless as a theory. In conclusion, I have demonstrated that libertarianism and compatibilism are reducible to determinism. I argue that we live in a deterministic universe, since there is no reason to believe that there is a special faculty that only human beings possess, called free will, whose workings are not subject to cause and effect, while relying on everything else to operate according to cause and effect. Nonetheless, whether we have free will, and if so, how it works, is an empirical question. Determinism is based on cause and effect. The theory of determinism is not harmed by the existence of free will, since it can simply subsume free will as a cause. I discussed 3 reasons why, despite determinism, we still cannot know the future. They involve technical difficulties, randomness in nature, and how predictions modify behavior. If we are hence unable, even theoretically, to definitively predict the future and know the predictions, then the future is still wide open, at least in its unknowability, even if we live in a deterministic universe. Thank you.